Welcome back to my workshop. Today's little project is something I've been requested to make by someone in work. It's now Saturday morning, it's hailstones outside, which is quite surprising since it's supposed to be spring. And today's project, I'm going to see if I can turn a letterbox, a piston, and the world's most deformed piece of oak with a nice split in it into this. Let's see if I can do it. Yeah, it's a trophy for the guys in work. They're going to be doing some karting activities soon, and the guy in work, Matt, he wanted a trophy. So let's see how I get on. So the very first thing I had to do was come up with some sort of design. Now this is obviously a quick scribbly design. It changed later on. Initially I was going to have the piston up in the air, but mounting that was quite tricky, so I ended up doing that the other way up. You'll see later on. Right, first of all I split the piece of oak that I had. As you can see, even half of it was so uneven. It was about 10 mil on one side and only about 4 or 5 mil on the other. So ripping it down the middle, at least give me a chance of having two separate pieces of wood that I could use. So first of all, I knew the thinnest piece was flat on one side, so run it through my thicknesser first to try and get it as thin as possible, or as even as possible. You can see there checking it with a pair of calipers. Now onto the second piece, which wasn't so flat on one side, so I had to run it over the plane a bit first, or the jointer part as the Americans would call it, then convert my machine back again to thicknessing, put my extractor on there and run it through the thicknesser. Now this piece I managed to get slightly thicker overall, so it's probably about 7 or 8 mil thick, but I still had to run it through quite a few times, checking on dimensions again with my calipers, and then once I was done with that, I can put my thicknesser away on my trolley that I made. If you'd watched one of the other videos, just give it a quick clean up and get it out of the way. Okay, now basic sizing for the trophy. I had a quick measure up of the piston just to get an idea of how big it was going to be, and then roughly cut the sides of the box. So it's going to be a stand, which is basically going to be a box shape. So this is my using the chop saw, just basically cutting the sides and the top and the bottom to the right size. Now initially I was going to have it higher than it is now, but I chopped that down as well, so it was a bit more in scale. Now I had to do some experimentation here because I didn't really want to do box joints on the stand, so I thought I'd do just basically 45-degree angles on each corner, so the joints are seamless. And here I did some experimentation with my new sander, and I set up a little jig at 45 degrees. This was my experiment. It seemed to work okay, and then basically run it to a certain depth, but at 45 degrees, and I did obviously the check first to make sure that it was all going to fit evenly, and there it does, you can see. Okay, so now it was onto the top. It's cutting the top to the right size, and the base is obviously going to be slightly bigger, and then because of the design was going to be on the sides, I wouldn't be able to fit the whole completed stand into the CNC machine. So the initial design on the right hand side there was a guy in a go-kart, and on the left hand side there was going to be a couple of racing flags. Now the racing flags, original picture I used was quite poor quality, so I basically had to redo that deleting vectors on the drawing and putting in new vectors. Here I'm setting up my CNC machine and starting it off to do the first carving. Just checking to make sure it's all going okay, and then move on to the design of the little fat man on the top. Now this guy is going to be holding the piston, and basically I didn't want it overcomplicated. Didn't want it to be a proper sculpture, and it's going to be a very simple silhouette of a man. I'm basically going to do this in 3 sections. It's going to be his left hand side, his right hand side, and his centre section. So basically drew a rough outline and then cut that out on the bandsaw. You could see I've stuck 2 pieces of the oak together just using double-sided tape. Then that way I can get it the same on both sides, and you can see it here. But you can see each one has both got 2 legs. Now what I did is on the right hand one I cut off his back leg, and on the left hand one I cut off his front leg, so it looks like he's actually leaning into the piston. By this time the engraving was done for the go-kart and the flags, so pulled one of those out and then back to the little man. Now cutting off some sections here so he could be actually gripping either side of the piston. Started off doing it with a very small tenon saw. That wasn't working very well. It gave me some initial guidelines, but then I decided to use my rotary tool. Now this is a work zone tool. It's from Aldi's, but all of the bits are interchangeable with Dremels, and it was a fraction of the cost, and it is very good, I must admit. So I used that to basically dig out a lot of the carved bits that I needed. Now here you just quickly saw me sticking all 3 pieces together and clamping it together just using normal wood glue. This part here is the base, just rounding off the corners of the base before I put any profile on it. Did some experimentation first to get the right profile. It's using my little profile sander router. And then once I was happy with the shape, then I did the actual base, and then back to the CNC machine. Yep, so that's all done. Checking it, setting it up again now. You can see the flags going there. Okay, and then once they're all done, I can actually do a trial fit first, a dry fit first, to make sure that they're all going to fit together, and then a bit of wood glue, and then clamp them in place with it's a strap that's designed for doing frames, but it works perfectly well on a box. And then cut some small pieces of oak to act as supports for each corner on the inside. So just cut the piece, sand it so it didn't have any foreign bodies on it, and then stick into place as you can see here. Then the top can go on. Put some weight on it, and then I actually left this overnight to set. So I just check in there to make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary, and this is the next day. I've taken all the weight off. You can see I've had a bit of a tidy up on the bench as well. Okay, now what I wanted to do is put some extra strengthening between the base and the top. So what I did is I cut some more pieces of oak and did some more internal strengthening. And it's not carrying a lot of weight, but I want it to be as robust as possible, so it doesn't actually get damaged. Those extra long pieces they're what's going to be used to actually screw through the base to hold it all together. Then onto the little fat man again, using my bobbin sander to actually profile them all together, all in one piece, and then that way there won't be any oddities about it. It won't be bits of wood sticking out. This worked quite well. Obviously I had to change the bobbin a couple of times. Here you can see I've got the smallest piece on there, which I still couldn't quite get into all of the little recesses, but it gave me an overall profile, which worked quite well. For the smaller pieces here I use my rotary tool again just to do some final trimming of the bits of wood. They work quite well. As I say, it's not a sculpture, it's just a profile of a man holding a piston. A little bit of final sanding by hand, just to make sure there's nothing sticking out. I didn't want anything to catch it, because obviously when the trophy's been cleaned afterwards, I didn't want it to catch bits of cloth or whatever. Then tried it as a quick trial fit, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to be him holding the big end of the con rod. Now onto my metal. This is where the letterbox comes in. I needed a piece of brass, and the quickest way I could get a piece of brass was to buy a letterbox. Took the letterbox apart, and the actual flap that I was going to use wasn't anywhere near as flat as I thought it was going to be, so I spent ages trying to flatten it out. Quickly cut off all the lugs, measured it to size, and used a bit of double-sided tape to stick it to a piece of MDF, and then use my angle grinder just to trim it down. Now this part here, I was trying to figure out the best ways to put a framework around the brass plaque. This took 3 different attempts. The first attempt was just using battens, and then I was going to profile them afterwards. This didn't work, so I tried profiling a piece of oak first and then cutting it to size. This didn't work, and then in the end I used a solid piece and decided to cut out basically the window for the brass plaque using the CNC machine. So just basically putting a quick profile, 2 levels of cut. The first cut would cut to about 3 or 4 mil deep, and then the second cut would be slightly inside that and go all the way through the material. So that would give me basically a profile that the brass plaque would sit inside. So set the CNC machine up to do that. Use some double-sided tape to hold it down. This wasn't quite enough, as you'll see in a moment. Initially just used 2 bits of double-sided tape, set my 0 point and started it going too fast, and yes, I broke a bit. Obviously it went very quick there, and that's a 3 mil bit, and it just snapped it because it was going too fast. So I altered the speed, the feed rate, and then started running again. And as you can see here, I'm putting in some extra supports because it was actually tipping at the back where the tape wasn't holding. So I temporarily stopped the machine, re-zeroed it, and then started it again with it securely mounted down. This didn't take too long, but while it was doing, I went and started doing some sanding. Using a random orbital sander, did the first batch of sanding. Just check to make sure the CNC is still going. More sanding, and then that had finished, so I could remove the center and quick trial with the brass plate. Yep, that all works. And back to sanding. Now this piece here is just a piece of wood. I just wanted to make sure it's flat, a piece of wood with a bit of sandpaper on it, so I could do the whole of the surface at once. This is the little window. It's now finished on the CNC machine. A bit of hand sanding, and then back to the CNC machine. Now this is for some engraving, the words, the actual trophy, Piston Challenge Trophy engraving. Now I've never engraved onto metal before on this CNC machine, so this was the first for me. So basically did a quick design, and this is how it went. So basically put the brass plaque in place and then held it down with double-sided tape behind it, and then I put some extra tape around the edges just to stop it lifting up. I had this going quite slow because obviously I didn't know how it was going to behave, but this is a 20-degree engraving bit, and I was only going down to about, I think it was about 1.5 mil, and it seemed to go, providing I monitored it okay and continuously vacuumed off the all the metal shavings and brushed it continuously. It seemed to work, so I'm quite pleased with that. Alright, now back to the box. Now this bit, I'm covering the ends in a quick coating of shellac, and I'll let that dry. Now this is over the top of the engraving, and you'll see why I did that in a moment. And then I got my little bench grinder out. This has got a buffing wheel on it, and I decided to quickly try and clean up the piston. So first of all the big end cap, and then the actual piston body. Spent quite a while doing this, and and it turned out okay, but I did have to finish it off with some auto sole afterwards. Now these are the two engravings on the end, and you can see what I've done is I've covered it in shellac, and now I'm covering all of the engraving with just basic automotive aerosol blacks paint. Now I'll leave that to dry. So basically I've flooded all the engraving, and when I sand it off, you'll see the end result. Now I'm mounting the base onto the very bottom bit, the very base. What I've done is I've marked it all out, and I'm drilled 4 holes through for screws to go through the bottom base into the actual stand. Quickly sand it off to make sure there's no sharp edges on it, clamp it into the right location, and then drill some pilot holes, and then I put these screws in by hand just in case I didn't want anything to split. Now on the brass plaque window, marked all 4 corners, because basically this has got to be able to be removed so new names can be engraved onto the brass plaque. So sussed out the middle of the box, drilled the 4 holes and put the screws in, little brass screws in by hand, then took it back off again and counter sunk so it was all flush and there was no screws sticking out. Then took the base off again, and this time it was to mount our little fat man and the piston. What it is, I marked his feet positions and then drilled some pilot holes through, and then drilled some corresponding holes in his feet, so you can't see any fixings from outside. Basically the screws come from inside and straight into his feet. Then quick rounding off the corners on the brass plaque window, and then a final sand. Now this is where I sand off the shellac, and you can see here when I blow off the sanding, so once that's blown off, it reveals all of the paint that's been flooded into the carving. So now more sanding, lots of hand sanding and random orbital sanding. This is the preparation for whatever treatment I'm going to do. But first of all, I had to sign it. Now I need to make myself a branding iron here, but that was just using a pyrography pen to sign it and date it. Just so I know I made it. Had a bit of a clear up here because obviously I've been doing quite a lot of sanding, and my next step was obviously going to be doing some staining and varnishing or whatever. So basically cleared all the surfaces, did some quick experimentation with different colours. I had it in my mind what colour I wanted, and first off I was going to use just dark oak on everything, but I ended up using some Indian rosewood for the actual main trophy, and then some dark oak for the little fat man, just to give it a little bit of a contrast. It's not much of a contrast, most people probably wouldn't notice, but you can actually see the difference there. The little fat man is a slightly different colour, and now this was just basically the final assembly, screwing it all together. I did it all by hand, a little bit of CA glue to hold the piston down, and then once that was dry I give the whole thing a coating in natural beeswax, so put that on, and then a thorough buffing off, and then once that's done, this is the final product. It's turned out okay. I'm quite impressed with it. It seems a lot more robust than I thought it was going to be. I'm sure if you dropped it on the floor it wouldn't survive very well, but all in all I think the overall effect is good. The plaque can be removed so it can be engraved later. Close up here of the, obviously on one side just to show it's a go-karting trophy, and then obviously the piston because it's the Piston Challenge. And our little fat man, you can see here he's got one leg forward and one leg back, and that was achieved by cutting each of his legs off on the original profiles. Yeah, it turned out okay. It's all nice and smooth. All the edges are nice and rounded. Let's hope they like it. So that's it. It's all finished, and here it is. Very nice. Yeah, hopefully the guys in work will be pleased with that. I should be taking it into work tomorrow so they can have a look and then get ready to see who's going to win it. So good luck to the guys who are going to be racing for this. Hope you've enjoyed watching how I made it. You might have even learned something. I've learned I can actually do some engraving onto brass. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I'll be making something else out of wood next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye. What am I going to do with these bits?